Hey everyone, welcome to the Industry Show. I'm your host, Nitin Bajaj, and joining me today is Sujata Sahu, Anish Ramachandran, and Vandana Tilak. Vandana, thanks for bringing us all together.
Thank
Now,
you.
let's start with Sujata. Sujata, tell us, what is the 17,000 Feet Foundation?
Hi, Nitin. Great to be in the show. And yes, thank you, Vandana, for bringing us all together. Yes, I'm the founder of an organization called 17,000 Feet Foundation. As the name suggests, we work in high altitudes. I started this organization approximately 10 years ago on a solo trek into Ladakh. Ladakh is a high altitude mountainous areas in the Indian Himalayan region. And the very little is known about this region apart from the fact that there are hundreds of hamlets, it's high altitude, there are many people who live in the shadows of vast mountain ranges. And on this solo trek that I went about 10 years ago, I noticed very small hamlets with very small schools struggling to impart quality education to their children. And the desperation for young parents to get good education for their children was leading them to send their very young children to faraway towns, sometimes alone. uh, I actually saw children as young as 3 and 4 years old being sent away just to faraway towns so they could get access to better education. And I wondered why this was so when there was a government school right in their backyards. So I started 17,000 Feet Foundation to help keep these children back at home. I wouldn't send my 3-year-old child far away to live further away from me. I wouldn't. So I started 17,000 Feet Foundation to improve the government school education system in remote mountainous areas like Ladakh, in the hope that parents would see the value of the public school education that's being given to them, keep their children at home, and consequently also stay in those villages. What was also happening as a result of young children being sent away was even parents were moving away after a while. And we have to mind these are our border regions. And these are the regions that actually, these are our first line of defense. And having these villages get deserted because of want of something so simple as quality education was for me not some, it was a non-negotiable. So yeah, 17,000 feet today works in about two different states. It's Ladakh and Sikkim. In most of the border areas, we work in about 250 very remote government schools. We work to improve education, just draw awareness and some development into the region. We do a lot of work. Most of our villages are not on access roads.
Hmm.
It takes us 2 to 3 days to reach them, 2 to 3 days of walk, mind you. They don't have mobile connectivity. They have very little by means of infrastructure. But yes, they have people like you and me with very little children who are just desperate for good education. So that's what 70,000 feet does. And I'm so happy to be here and share a little bit about our story and the work we do.
Thanks for being here, Sujata, and I'm glad you took that trip many years ago and what you have accomplished. And would love to hear more on where we go from here. Anish, turning to you, tell us about the 1 Billion Literates Foundation and the mission and the impact.
Sure, Nitin. First of all, thank you for inviting us over here and providing this platform. It's truly a privilege to be here. The way I like to introduce or talk about 1 Billion Literates Foundation is that we are a grassroots nonprofit that works to empower communities who are in rural, underprivileged segments of the country. OBLF, and we call it OBLF because 1 Billion Literates Foundation is a bit of a mouthful. We've been around for about 12 years now. We started in 2010. This was the vision of one person who happened to be in the rural parts of Karnataka, saw the state of government schools and decided to do what she could within her sphere of control and influence and start educating. That's how the vision was born. That's how the foundation was born. And over the last 12 years since then, we have worked and we continue to work in the space of education, specifically foundational education and primary education for children studying in rural government schools. We work in skilling of women, specifically semi-educated women who live in these communities. We skill them, create capacity in them, and then provide employment for them in the work that the foundation does. We work in public health, again, specifically enabling primary healthcare access to these rural, remote communities. And finally, we work in rehabilitation of severely marginalized and poor communities as well. In many ways, really, our purpose for the foundation comes from a core belief that for communities to thrive, especially marginalized communities to thrive, there are these different dimensions that impact them. And all of these different dimensions need to be focused on. It's like thinking about a stool and the different legs of a stool. For that stool to be stable, all the different legs need equal focus. And so for us, the dimensions that we choose to focus on are education, health, skilling of women and bringing them back into the workforce, and working with marginalized communities.
Thanks, Anish. Again, thank you for doing what you do. And Vandana, coming to you, tell us about Jupiter 360, and more importantly, also how Jupiter works with other nonprofits like OBLF and 17,000 feet.
Sure. So I just thought about this, is that 17,000 feet just gives context to space and distance. And we are on the other side of the planet, literally. And our hearts still are in India. We still want to do what we can for India. And after being 10 years in the rural, in the development side, I figured that rural India is the one that's the most in need right now, especially after COVID, when education, all these systems started seeing how fragile they are. That was the main idea behind starting Jupiter, was to clarify that we are working for rural development. And then you can't just take one thing, you have to take everything. Because one thing feeds into the other, one thing is dependent on the other. And you can't just say, I'm going to work on education, that's what's closest. Just take the whole thing and see where organizations like OBLF or 17,000 feet are working and are able to bring the highest amount of impact. So we went about looking for organizations that were doing impactful work. Sujata, I have known for the last many years, since she used to be living in the US. And she's also a motorcycle rider. She rides, she used to be in Pune, drive on a motorbike. So she's quite the hiker and the biker as I know her. And Anish, of course, has been a very good friend of our board, one of our board members. He's ex-Intel. And this organization has the mind and the heart together in one place to really bring about change. So what Jupiter does with OBLF and with 17,000 feet is to find what is your wish, what is your secret wish, what is your the loudest wish, and figure where you want to be in the next 3 to 5 years. Because if you look at the sustainability of an organization, you are working hand to mouth. The parents are hungry, the kids are being fed. And when you look at the overall operations of a nonprofit, unless you actually work towards building the nonprofit itself, the beneficiaries in the long run are not going to be as well off as if you would, supporting the organization. And building capacity, hiring more people, training them, it frees up, it gives them breathing room, saying that for the next 3 years, we are able to do this without being anxious about all of these other things that could happen or could not happen. So we are able to fund them. We work with them side by side without intruding on what their current programs are or what they think. This is more of a collaborative effort. Like, we are part of the NGOs themselves, not standing back and saying, grant makers, here, what does this money look like and what do you think? This is more of a collaborative effort. So we have advisors, and the advisors work with them, and they have been for the longest time. And we are quite excited. On the 13th, everybody is going to come together, the board members, the volunteers, our donors. We are all looking forward to it.
That's awesome. And I love the fact that you bring your experience and expertise, and then you have a team of these advisors that provide that insight and that strength to that organization and allow them to leverage all of those skill sets for their benefit and for the benefit of their beneficiaries. So I love this teamwork. Now, I'm curious about, Vandana, you mentioned something about Anish being at Intel. So, Anish, I'm curious to know from all of you, why do this? Right? You could have led your corporate lives. Sujata, you could have been on more motorcycle rides. Why do this? Right?
Thank
Anish,
you
I
so
would love
much.
to start with you.
Sure, Nitin. It's a great question. Um, and in many ways, I think it's a very compelling question as well. But and my response may sound a little simplistic, and I assure you it's not. But why do this? If we didn't do this, who else would? And to me, that's the most compelling part of what we do. And when I say we, it's the collective we.
Sure.
It's the people who have the privilege, the wealth, the understanding, the awareness, the perspectives. And I think it's really up to us to look at the issues in front of us, look at the challenges in front of us, and see what is it that we can do within our control and our influence. And don't have anybody else to look up to. So to me, in a way, that was the calling. When I started to understand more and more about things that are broken around me and things that needed attention, uh, it was a calling to say there's got to be something that I can do with my privilege that can possibly make a difference, hopefully make a difference.
Thanks, Anish. Sujata, what about you?
Oh, I totally echo what Anish just said. Yeah, like I said, see, I was in corporate for 15 years in the US and India, and a chance trek just brought me face to face with the reality of a geographical region I barely knew anything about. So
Mhm.
the first thing that was brought to my mind was, yes, we're a privileged lot, but how do I know so little about my own country beyond these certain mountains? And as I went in deeper, and just like Anish, for me, it was a calling when I realized that there is an area where I don't understood why children and families had to struggle so much for something as basic as education, and why was development not reaching there? And
Mhm.
more so, like I also realized there were very few nonprofits that were working in that region. There are almost none. And that's what. So if not us, then who? I found a need, and yes, because I'm a trekker, because I'm a biker, I was drawn to that region.
Mhm.
So if not me, or if not people like us, who? So a lot of people are drawn to this region. Um, but absolutely, yes, a lot of time spent in the corporate, having been exposed to multicultural experiences, being in different workplaces, gave me a wealth of experience, and it just felt that yes, I could put it to some good use. And trust me, I'm using a lot of what I learned. I was in corporate IT. I'm using
Mhm.
technology in a big way, using what I've learned, and it's paying off. So, yes, I agree with Anish. We, if not us, it is the collective we, and I think we can make a difference. It starts with one person's vision, but it snowballs. And we have a lot of volunteers who come in here, and
Mhm.
once you're in it, like it feels like a journey, a continuous journey. So there's never a movement of, oh, I gave up something for this. I don't believe Anish feels that's way, neither do I. So it is a continuous journey, and it's rewarding, and you can see the results.
That's so
So
true. When you see the smile on that child's face,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's so rewarding. Vandana,
Yeah, when we don't get access to, like Vandana spoke about,
yes,
starvation cycles of non-profits, and when you feel that, oh, it's so hard to get funds, all we have to do is pick up those pictures and videos, and you're on the right track, and things feel better.
so true. Vandana, you have inspired me into this field. I know your why, but it's always great to hear, from you and have that reminder. So please tell us, why do you do this?
I think it's the same reason. It tugs at your heart. And I have been, kids are kids. And when I was in when I was a teenager working in rural Maharashtra in the remotest areas, you saw people as old as 70, 80, 90 walking 10 kilometers for a cataract surgery that, we were having a camp at. And it really opened my eyes. And when you see the difference in the life of a child in rural Adivasi areas in Maharashtra and in Mumbai, growing up in Mumbai, this was a huge contrast, and it used to bother me a lot. My uncle used to be a social worker there, and he built schools and universities there. He's literally lived in a tree until he could get down and teach a school when he first started. So, and now going past all my life, all of these turn out to be the steps towards what you do today. Tomorrow or day after is something else. It depends on what you learn today. But I have 3 grandkids, so you can imagine my age. But at this age, you go past the why, and then you figure why not.
Yes.
And you figure out why not, and you say, what's there to stop me? Aim high, and you'll be among the stars. And you have 2 stars here.
So true. And, as we aim high, we come across some challenges and then we come across some opportunities. Sujata, I would love to hear from you. What is the biggest challenge you're facing as an organization today?
Oh, am I allowed just one? Yeah, the biggest challenge I would say definitely is what Vandana alluded to is nonprofits not being able to get support for their base core functionings, right? It's the same thing when you're sitting in an airplane and they tell you wear your mask first before you put it on your child, and that's what is needed for organizations like us. We need to build our capacity before we can help those we've set out to help. So one of our biggest challenges is that it's also harder for us because the areas I choose to work in. So we've called 17,000 Feet Foundation. So for example, we're working in Ladakh and Sikkim right now. These are both high altitude areas and remote mountainous areas, let me say. And our focus is almost the entire Himalayan belt, of which there is very little knowledge. This lack of awareness is actually contributing to the fact that, it's harder for us to receive funds for core functions. So for us, that is the challenge. I would say that is the biggest challenge that we are facing. Everything else in terms of working, those are surmountable, and those things are found a way. So yeah, I think that's where I would say we're at.
Makes sense. Anish, what about you?
I would probably pick up on what Sujata said and kind of look at it from 2 lenses here. One is a kind of meta lens or a strategic lens, where I would say the one big challenge that I have seen is just the absence of understanding and awareness of issues, and more importantly, the implication of the issues on lives less privileged than ours. And I was part of that category up until a few years ago, and it's only when I kind of crossed over that I had a chance to study issues more deeply and understand the impact of those. And it's when you understand those deeply that you develop empathy and you develop ideas to what can be done to make things better. So I think that's a big challenge. And frankly, Nitin, I would say platforms like this, what you are doing and what Vandana is doing with Jupiter 360, are incredibly important platforms that provide an ability for organizations to talk about their stories and get more intelligentsia involved and engaged in the process of change, right? So I think I would talk about it look at the issue of challenge from that lens. Another lens is in a more operational view of the challenge, I would say, is just infrastructure. And that comes from how diverse and complex India is and how big India is, right? Again, you're hit with issues of last mile delivery. And I think that's a big problem in India. And that's where civic societies, NGOs hold an incredible advantage of knowing being able to build trust with remote communities and be that conduit for delivering services that you and I probably take for granted. And so thinking about those jugaad ways to get that predictable service out to communities, remote communities, I think is a challenge and something that we face every day.
True. Thanks for sharing that, Anish and Sujata. Vandana, from your perspective, as you look at these challenges, I would love to understand uh, the nexus with Jupiter and how you're able to help these foundations come out of those challenges.
Sure. When somebody starts a foundation, and Anish and Sujata have done this 10 years ago, but I will bring back the memories of when they started it. And no founder of a nonprofit starts saying, I'm starting a business. They're starting it as a nonprofit. They're starting it saying that I want to help somebody. The nonprofit actually, the structure actually comes after the thought that they want to do something, right?
True.
So they don't do that. And they learn on the way. And people like Anish and Sujata have a long corporate successful life to back up what they want to do, and they apply those skills. But before anything else, unless you put a program definition, unless you put an operational structure, unless you create a brand, unless you build the trust, the fundraising happens as a result of all of those things happening. And then, as I like say, money comes. You have to be strong on all of these things. So that's what Jupiter does, working with them. And we are working on all fronts, including the websites, including the branding, including the marketing, the messaging. And I think the biggest link is when you start a for-profit, there is somebody who decides there is value in their service or product that they are going to sell. The customer knows that value and pays for it. And here there is a whole different equation happening where the founder and the beneficiary are working, and a third person has actually take a look at those two people and say, I think this is great work and I need to fund this. So the person actually paying for that value is somebody else. And building that narrative between the two is understanding what the nonprofit is doing, understanding what the donor wants to do and how he wants to help and when he wants to help and what he actually means by saying, I want to help. Those things, that conduit is often missing in nonprofits, even in larger ones. I'm not saying in the smaller ones. People have been around for 20, 30 years and still don't know what that messaging has to be. And it's a function of them being so wrapped up in their day-to-day struggles that it happens. It's not a something that they think that it happens. So I think what I learned as an entrepreneur, what I learned as working for a large nonprofit, I thought that was needed for smaller nonprofits or even larger ones that needed to take and reevaluate what they were doing and figure out what the best way of that messaging has to be. So I work with them. So we have a whole team of people on in the US who work on that, and I think it's more of a long-term relationship that I look at with organizations. So I tend not to have too many. I tend to work with, the less is more kind of look.
True. Yeah. Makes sense. And with this as the foundation, right, where you plug some or most of the bigger challenges, I want to keep an eye on the opportunity that most excites you. Anish, would love to hear from you first.
Okay, sure. It's a difficult question, Nitin, because it's like being asked to select your favorite child. We work on multiple different areas. But if I had to pick one, I would probably pick for us, the newest kid on the block, so to speak, is our foray into public health, especially working in enabling primary healthcare services. We are working in the space of non-communicable diseases, which is basically diabetes, hypertension, and chronic respiratory disorders. All of these combined lead to more than 60% of all cause deaths in India. And what is more worrying is less than 4% of the people who have these diseases are actually aware that they have it, right? And so what OBLF is trying to do is through increased screening, diagnosis, and treatment, we plan to increase the number of people who are actually aware of the fact that they have one or more of these non-communicable diseases, and then put in place a protocol to treat them so that overall over at least a 10-year period, we can bring down the percentage of people who are afflicted by this and potentially prevent deaths that occur as an outcome of this.
Makes sense. Sujata, what's the most exciting opportunity you're looking at?
So interestingly, just before COVID hit us so badly, we had just started experimenting with digital education for these areas. And digital education is not that challenging, but in general. But it is if you're dealing with 70-80% of your villages without electricity or mobile connectivity. So then things just take on a different turn. So I experimented with a solution, and that for me has today that solution, very highly specialized solution using a little Raspberry Pi server and tablets and solar panels, solar powered basic digital education for areas with neither electricity or mobile connectivity. That has given us the potential to reach more villages much faster than I would have imagined, because obviously in these areas, when you have to walk for 3 days to reach a village, you can't scale up your numbers that faster. And it's not just about the numbers. What is happening is with digital education, we've been able to start our second state, and we've had governments looking at us and saying, look, help us reach those network shadow areas. So what's exciting for me is to be able to quickly reach those really disconnected, remote mountain border villages, which have these tiny little children, just 10, 20 of them in each village, and being able to give them access to the education they deserve. I don't see why they should not have opportunities to what our children have. So I'm looking at the next 3 states in the next 5 years, in the coming 5 years, and I'm hoping to reach this. I want to change the dialogue on, online education is something that everyone turned to during COVID. But so many million kids in the Northeast and the Indian Himalayan region, and actually even in some rest of India, didn't have access to. While we were talking about people without devices, nobody was talking about people without mobile connectivity or electricity. So I want to be able to raise the dialogue on that and really reach the last mile. So that's very exciting for me, and I want to be able to develop that solution more, and also piggyback on a lot more solution using that kind of a platform. So yeah, we're really excited about that.
And I'm excited with you. And Anish, again, really important work in terms of diagnosing these NCDs, and like you rightly pointed out, a major percentage of the population is starting to get impacted. So really important work. And Sujata, I agree with you that a lot of the children got left behind through this COVID crisis. Vandana, want to come to you and talk about what's the most exciting opportunity for you. I know there is a social impact fund in the making, so tell us about that, and tell us what's exciting you the most.
So yeah, social impact fund. I have had this bug in my head for the last 5 years or plus, and I have talked about it. I have read about it and researched it, and it's very common in the US, and it's not what investors look at now. Social impact fund is a very, very, very broad thing after being around for so long. Investors typically look for a return, and first thing they ask, what is my return? If you talk to a nonprofit or a grant maker, they will say, oh, we get it. You don't expect a return. But they do expect one. They expect one on a social return. So I call them investors because they're investing in social good. It's a fund that will have a less than a smaller return on capital or zero, whatever the investor wants. But overall, what it is to help smaller nonprofits have a much more sustainable roadmap towards what they want to achieve. So we pick up 2 organizations every year And we say, here is the operating plan that they devise with our advisors. This is their wish list of what needs to happen over the next 3 years. And then we fund it over the on specific milestones. And then the next year we add 2 more and 2 more. So that kind of snowballs into getting not just the nonprofits together that are working in rural areas, but also the investors who are looking to say that we are here for the long run. So there's a lot of private foundations that want to do this, who want to stay involved. The biggest problem with working with nonprofits that donors have given us feedback on is, of course, the being in the midst of doing, the reporting sometimes gets left behind. And so they says, we that's what we want. We want to see on the ground reports. We want to see pictures. We want to see impact measurements, how you are measuring impact. And that last part about measuring impact is actually money in the bank. It's actually what gives the next tranche of funds to nonprofits. And that's what we work with. So the social impact fund not just starts with finding the right cause, funding it, but also making sure that we close that gap, that last gap. And then, of course, keep adding more and more to what we do. But at the same time, working on all the areas with a much more hands-on approach, with a mutual trust that we build together.
Awesome. I love that you're adding fuel to the fire. So
Yes.
Well, thank you everyone for sharing your journeys and for the important work that you all are doing. We really appreciate you making the time to be with us and to share your journeys, your challenges, and the most exciting opportunities you're working on. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Nitin.
you.